So we have our rosewood fretboard, we have our maple binding, our frets, and our shadows for our frets, which to me still look a little harsh. Get rid of those a little bit, about 50% or so. And we have our inlays. And I'm real happy with the way this looks, so I'm going to save that. Now, of course, the next thing we could do would be to put our strings on this, and that is really fairly easy. The way I would do that is I start about the spacing that I want on the fretboard, what I would want along the edge of the fretboard, pull it across the pole pieces of the bridge humbucker, and release. And I just did that without putting it on its own layer. So I'm going to go up here above the binding layer, and I'm going to go another layer, call this strings. And I'm going to back this up a little bit so I can see the bridge. I grab that, and I think I want to be about 4 pixels on this line, at least for this size document that I'm working on. And that's going to vary depending on the size of document they're using. And I'm going to pull that a little bit past the bridge, and I'll show you why in just a minute. I'm going to duplicate that layer, or add a new layer, and I'm going to do the same thing with a 2 pixel line on the high E string. Looks pretty good. And the reason I do that is it just gives me a nice framework to work within, because I'm going to go, this is our, I should have named this easy, low E, high E. Save that. And I'm going to go in here and create a new layer and grab our tool again, set this back to 4 pixels. And I'm going to come in here and just pull another line. I'm not holding down shift because these are not parallel lines. I'm going to pop that in there, and that's going to be our A string. Create a new layer. This is going to be our D string. And then again, grab that layer. I'm going to reduce this to 3 pixels now to give us a little bit of range on our string diameters. Pop that through there, line it up with the pole pieces. And then I'm going to go one more. This will be our G string. Leave it about the same diameter. Pull it across those pole pieces. And then I'm going to do one more 2 pixel line for our B string. It's our B string. And I'm going to pull that right across there. Now that's looking pretty good. The reason I did these on individual layers is because sometimes you'll want to go back in and tweak a string up or down, and it looks like our low E string is a little cramping the A string a little bit. We may have to just monkey around with all of them to get the spacing correct. And that looks pretty good right there. Low E could still go up a hair. All right, so there we have that. I'm going to save that. And then something we can do on the strings. Right now, these are just flat lines. You can go into the effects, layer effects, and of course it defaults with that silly shadow on, which we don't want. I'm going to go to bevel and emboss and make sure it's applied. And I'm going to go to inner bevel. And you can see already when I turn this, you look right here, you can see when I turn this filter on and off, that string goes from really flat to looking kind of round and shaded on one side. And that's exactly what we want. It's probably a little heavy. I'm going to reduce this to 3 and maybe 1 for blur. That's good right there. And then I can go in here and I can copy that effect, paste effect, paste effect, oops, paste effect on each of our other strings. And now we have these kind of cool beveled looking strings. It doesn't put, unfortunately, it doesn't put windings on it, but in most photographs, on the windings on the wound strings, but in most photographs I've seen, the photography tends to blow those out anyway. They pick up enough light and reflection that they really kind of blow out anyway, so you don't ever get to see those fully. All right, so now that we're happy with that, I'm going to go ahead and select or link all of these string layers together from high E to low E with our effects applied, and I'm just going to hit Control E, which is merge linked, and that gives us one layer of strings. If I turn that on and off now, everything's on the same layer. Save my project. And I'm going to go back down here. Remember, we pulled these past the edge of the bridge just a little bit, and the reason for that is this is a wraparound bridge, and that string wrapping around there would actually extend past, visually would extend as it wraps over that edge, would extend past the edge of the bridge a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and cut these off. Not quite what I wanted. I'm going to cut these off so they're just a hair past the end of the bridge. And if you look at that, that gives you the illusion that they are, that there is some substance to the string there at the end of it, and it's wrapping around the tail end of the bridge. And that bridge is pretty ugly, but it's just from a photograph of another guitar that I cut it out of. All right, so this is pretty good. A couple of things we can do to make this a little more realistic. I'm just going to rename this strings because it's obviously all strings on one layer now. Save that. I'm going to copy that layer and pull it down below. And I'm going to call this string shadows. And I'm going to control click it to select it. I'll change my foreground color to black and do a fill command and fill that with black. Now if I grab my move tool and start to tweak this off axis of where we were, we'll see that we've got a little bit of shadow for our strings happening there. I'm going to go into filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and that's probably about right. About 2.5 or so pixels. Save that. All right, now as we go down the guitar, we look at this. Obviously the strings are above the fretboard here, so we would see some shadow. They're above the pickups, so we would see some shadow. And they're above the guitar top, so we would see a little bit of shadow there. But they're actually laying on top of our bridge, so we probably wouldn't see a cast shadow there. So I'm going to grab my polygonal tool, and I'm using it because the bridge is kind of off axis a little bit. It's not straight up and down. If it were straight up and down, I could grab our marquee select tool, but the polygonal lasso gives me the ability to do diagonal lines and get a pretty good selection. So I'm going to chop those off of there. And to my eye, that's a little more realistic than you would see. You wouldn't see a shadow line there. And I'm going to bring the opacity of those shadows down just a little bit. And again, this throws the shadow onto our frets and our fretboard and inlays and just kind of makes them a little more part of the composite. Now I'm going to take this one more time and duplicate it. I'm going to call this string reflections. Well, actually, string reflections and string shadows. I'm going to go ahead and save that. And same thing, I'm going to just grab my move tool and I'm going to tweak those down a couple of pixels. Now, first thing we see is we wouldn't have reflections on our pickups. So I'm just going to come right here. Well, you might have a little bit depending on the color, but for our purposes, we're not going to. Nor would you have them in the cavities. So I'm going to cut that away. I'm going to go here to here to, yeah, actually all the way out here because it wouldn't really have reflections on the fretboard either, and I get that back in frame, I can finish that up. And we'll get rid of the reflections out there. So basically we have reflections on our chrome bridge, on our and on our guitar body. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to do filter, blur. I'm going to blur these about 1 pixel. Don't want to really do more than that. And then I'm going to bring their opacity way down. So we have a little bit of reflection there, just a touch. And if we're being realistic about this, which we have been so far, the reflections on our bridge wouldn't be as intense as they are on the body because, again, the distance is different. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab those and I'm just going to tweak them up tight to the bridge, to the strings themselves. I don't know if I obliterated them or not. And I may have gone too far. Undo our nudge. I'm just going to go. That's probably good right there. So they're still there, but they're on a different position. They're in a different position than what we see from the rest of the reflections. And those might still be a little hot. I'm going to drop them down to about 20%. That looks better. Okay, so what we've done here is we've added our fretboard, our binding, our frets, our inlays, our strings with shadows and reflections. You can see we have nice shadows on the pickups there. Shadows and reflections on the guitar top. We have reflections on the bridge. So there you have it. I mean, that's pretty much it. You can go as far as you want with this. If you wanted to put some little highlights on the strings that show like a camera blooming, that sort of thing, I mean, that's easy enough to do. It's really just, you know, draw a shape that you think that might look like and blur it, and then use an additive transfer mode to really make it, you know, stand out. But that's pretty much it.